You're listening to Parasearch UK Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the KTPF Reload Show. In case you're wondering what the Reload Show is about, if you haven't heard previous shows, these are the interviews that were conducted by good friends of mine, Steve and Sue Taggart, in the days of the KTPF radio show. Their own radio show ran for just over 4 years, broadcasting every week for over 3 hours. I joined them in the last 18 months of the show's run, but eventually the guys felt they'd just about had enough. It was a monumental effort to keep broadcasting every week for 3 hours. It was a wonderful show. But unfortunately they're no longer involved, and the shows have just sort of sat in the archives, so I thought it would be nice to bring them back to life and bring you the interviews that the guys conducted over those 4 years. They include some of the most interesting people within the world of the paranormal and some not so well known but still, nevertheless still very interesting. We even have 1 or 2 rather unusual shows, including a live seance and other things along those lines. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed tonight's show, and this is the KTPF Reload Show. Enjoy.
This program deals with themes of an adult nature and is intended for a mature audience. They've landed.
You're in the right place. Online, on the web, and on air. All over the world.
Talk radio.
You hear us, we hear you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to another edition of the KTPF Community Talk Show. My name is Suzanne.
And I'm Steve.
And I'm still Andy.
And we are here keeping the paranormal friendly every Sunday evening. We bring you a relaxed show with no pressure, so just sit back with your favourite beverage and listen whilst we talk about various topics, from cryptozoology to UFOs, and share information, advice, and most importantly, friendship. Remember, collaboration, not competition. Well, on tonight, just to let you know, we will be speaking to Scotty Roberts, who is a man of diverse interests and a fairly eclectic background. He is founder of and publisher of Intrepid magazine and monthly journal focusing on politics, science, culture, conspiracy theories and unexplained phenomena. So that's what's coming up tonight. So we're going to add Scotty to the conversation with Andy. So hopefully he will join us pretty soon. Hope this works, otherwise I lose Andy. I don't want to do that. I'm still not au fait with this. It looks like we're going to get Scotty and Andy together, so that's good. So
I'm here. Evening, Scotty.
Evening, Scotty.
Good evening, how are you?
Not too bad. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Scotty Alan Roberts, and as I mentioned, he is a man of diverse interests and been branded as a fairly eclectic background that you have. Is that correct, Scotty?
I think you could probably call it that. I've just done a lot of stuff, and as we say affectionately, I've thrown all the doo-doo against the wall to see what sticks, kind of all under this umbrella, and so I've done a lot of things.
Right, okay. Well, we've got Andy also on Skype with us, our co-host, so if you hear another voice in the background, apart from Steve that's with me now, my husband, there is 3 of us that will be interviewing you tonight. So, first of all, as I say, can you tell us a bit about yourself and also how you met John in the process?
Sure. Let's see. Well, I always had a curiosity in the strange stuff. That started as a kid, and I think that's where we all pretty much start these courses of life that we follow. It goes from curiosity to imagination to fantasy to trying to look into it deeper as you get a little older. I spent some time in seminary, Bible college and seminary, and I was in ministry in a very conservative, fundamental denomination. And it raised a lot of questions for me as I got a little older, and I drifted away from that and really wanted to start researching some of the things I had questions about that didn't seem to be answered in books of faith.
Yeah.
And I can't say I've thrown out the baby with the bathwater, but I'm probably a little more agnostic now than I've ever been, just simply meaning I just don't know the answers.
Right.
And John Ward is somebody that I met of all places. He would tell you that it was when he scraped me off the floor of a strip bar in Singapore once. But that's if you ever hear him tell that tale, just give a wink and a nod. We actually met on Facebook of all places about 5 years ago.
Okay.
I saw his archaeological site that he had listed, and I went and I started chatting with him a bit, and we got to know each other. We spent just about every day talking on Skype. He would sit on the rooftop of his the third floor of the house that he lives in Luxor, Egypt, and show me the Theban mountains in the background, and we'd sit and talk and compare notes on things, and we got to talking about Moses and the Exodus.
Yeah.
And I said, look, this is something I followed for many years and done my own research on. I said, you're right there in Egypt. You've been there for 15 years. I said, what's your theory? And we talked about it for a while, and that was just before I had got my first book published with New Page Books on the Nephilim. And so John and I, he came to speak at the Paradigm Symposium, where I met him face-to-face for the first time about 3 years ago. And we presented it to our publisher at New Page Books, and they liked the idea, and so we wrote the Exodus Reality together. And now we've become he's probably my dearest friend on the planet. And if I can speak for him, probably vice versa. And we traveled together over there doing research for the book, and we take tours and we bring people over to Egypt. We're taking a big one to Ireland in June. That's still open for people to come and join if they want to join us. And so that's what we do. And we do all kinds of stuff together. We do the Paradigm Symposiums together in October. We do the Intrepid magazine together. We do Intrepid radio together. Which is expanded into the IPBN network, and our partner has just bought an FM terrestrial station in the cities here, and so some of that's going to be crossing over into that. So we're busy all the time, and then of course he's an archaeologist as well.
Yeah. So what made you decide to research the Egyptian pyramids with John? Was it because John was already there and he was doing it, and you joined him?
Yeah, we didn't so much research the pyramids themselves, rather than just visiting them, but John had been there over the course of the last 15 years many, 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 many times. And so we didn't really write about the pyramids at all. We do get asked a lot of questions about them.
Yeah.
I had done a little stint on Ancient Aliens, the television show here, back in 2012. They filmed me for 4 or 5 different episodes, and then they wanted John and I to do an episode the next year on something to do with pyramids and going into Mesoamerica and things like that, and the pyramids there. And by that time, we had just kind of bowed out of really wanting to be too closely affiliated with the Ancient Aliens show.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Yeah, because there's a theory, isn't there, that the pyramids are something to do with aliens, and mainly the core. Is it, Steve, that you know more about this, about the core at the top?
Right.
You want about the main one at Giza?
Yeah, the main one at Giza.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's supposed that the top was actually collecting power, reflected from the cornerstones back up to the.
Right. I think that there are, just for as many people as have visited the pyramids, there's almost as many theories about what they were. If you actually go there, I remember John and I, when we were inside the Great Pyramid and we were crawling up to the King's Chamber, you exit out at one point after about, I'd say, roughly a football field's length of a 45-degree angle shaft that's about 4 feet tall, and so you're crawling up hunched over, And we got up into the Grand Gallery, which opens up, and you're about 75 feet tall, and you're looking at all this. And I actually said to John at that point, I said, it's very clear to me that this was built by guys.
Yeah.
And now, if there was any kind of outside influence, maybe I have to back this up just a little bit, is that while I can't dismiss an alien notion or a spiritual notion of any kind, I think it's very clear that the pyramids themselves were built by people. That the Egyptians had the ingenuity, they had the genius to do it. They spent lifetimes building these things. And in recent years, like the last 20 years, they've uncovered all the workers' village that is right there on Giza Plateau, where 20,000 people would have lived there, building and working and supporting the industry of building the pyramid and the Great Pyramids. And the quarries are right there. You can go right up to the base of the pyramids and see that you're standing in a quarry where they poured some of the stone. The first 6 courses of the Great Pyramid itself are all actually carved to look like layers of stone, when in actuality they're just carved out of the mountainside that was there, the outcrop that was there, and then they built the rest on top of that. So, and there's many theories on how they were built, how they were constructed, because there's a lot of intricate details. There's nothing there that gives you any evidence that it was anything other than a stone structure. We don't know what it was for. We know it wasn't for a tomb. There's no tombs there. Don't think anybody was ever entombed there. There's the sarcophagus that's up inside the king's chamber, as they call it, up inside the Great Pyramid, that was probably never housed a coffin of any kind.
Yeah.
And so, when John and I were there, I don't like to dismiss theory, but what I found myself getting more and more to do is almost the way I treat biblical things in the Bible and spirituality in general, is that I hate to go with any kind of a theory that says, well, this is what I think happened, or this is how I feel. I can feel a lot of things, especially after eating crab cakes and raw tomatoes. But so I can feel lots of things. That doesn't mean it means anything. So you've got to really dig into the research of what it is. If there was a spiritual element there, we already know that much. We know that the Egyptians said that the gods told them to do this or told them to do that, or something was revealed to a pharaoh by a god or to a priest by a god. Those kinds of things we can go with. But we get that nowadays, too. We'll have televangelists will say, God told me, so you get it on all different levels. So,
Steve?
Of the 4 pyramids at Giza, why do you think that one was never used?
I'm not sure.
Because a lot of people think there's only 3, but there's actually 4, isn't there?
There's the big 3, and there's 50 almost within sight. You can see out on the horizon pyramids all over the place. Giza just gets a lot of attention because the Sphinx is there. There's the 3 big ones. Then there's the smaller ones, which are called the Queen's the Queen's pyramids. And they're much smaller. I mean, they're maybe 20 feet tall and down into the ground. And we crawled inside one of those as well. And not sure why they weren't used, unless they were used for different purposes than we perceive them to have been used. I know Robert Bauval has come out with some pretty interesting theories about how they were used. They were used in ritual. They were used to... In a sense, it's like building a skyscraper. A rich man builds a skyscraper to leave a legacy for himself. It may have been something of that nature, as banal and simple as that, is that a pharaoh was leaving his mark. This was his place. One of them, like the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid of Cheops, they don't think he was ever buried there or entombed there, but there are lots of theories as to what it was used for, from ritual to memorial to, and then you get your wild theories too that go way out there, that it was some kind of a generator of some kind, or water generator. And we just don't know that. There's no real evidence for that. People can look at it and try to decipher what they think it is, but there's not an evidence that it ever worked in those capacities.
Why do you think they stopped building them?
Oh, I think it's probably just as simple as a change in a pharaoh, a change in times. They just I think it was as easy as the next pharaoh said, "Well, I'm not building one of those."
Yeah,
just dig a hole in that mountain. That'll do.
Yes. I do believe that they left a lot of their marks on the big temples, and these temples were called houses of millions of years. And because they believed they would last forever. But then the next pharaoh would come along and scrape the guy's name off the sandstone blocks and put his own in there. We have lots of history of that. One of the most famous would be one of the things, I remember having a discussion on this with some people online, and that's the Abydos lintel, where it supposedly shows a picture of a helicopter and all the different jet or things like that are all on there. When in actuality, what that is through infrared photography, it's the product of about 3 different erasures and reinscriptions over the top. And so you're going to get natural erosion. You're going to get some of the colors show through. You're going to get when a pharaoh took and scraped off an inscription and put his own on, there is still a remnant behind. And so with erosion, you're going to get things that start to make shapes look different. And they've actually deciphered all 3 different levels of those scrapings, and I've got pictures of infrared of how you can divide those out. So the helicopter shape was actually a combination of 3 different eras of inscription laid on top of each other and scraped off. And so this is what these pharaohs did. As time moved on, I'm no specialist on the pyramids, so I couldn't tell you distinctly why they left off building pyramids. But I know they didn't build them in as grandiose a scale as they did. You still have pyramids that were being built, but they were much smaller. They were about the size of a normal house, you could say, in the city. They would build something that's 20 feet tall, and that would be a tomb. And you'll find examples of that all over Egypt.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other great mysteries is obviously the Sphinx. But people go through and they miss a lot just trying to get to it, don't they? Isn't there a temple connected to it?
Yeah, there's a temple connected to it, which is a very interesting temple. It's made out of alabaster. The floors are alabaster, I know. But the architecture on the Sphinx temple is very different from anything of that anything else of the Sphinx era, of anything else around it. It's where you have blocks of stone that are actually, the corners are curved out, and you have a little overlapping section that will fit into the next. It's like putting together a square jigsaw puzzle. And it's very interesting architecture on that doesn't match the style of architecture of other things on the Giza Plateau. So they think, John, I know, believes it is much, much older.
Now, you and John have different ideas about Egyptology. So I was just wondering, what is your common love of Egypt and the esoteric?
What is my common what? I'm sorry?
What is your common love between you and John about Egypt and the esoteric?
Well, I would say that it really, for both John and I, it came together on the Moses story.
Right.
Which is what we wrote about. So our common love there is, well, we both have a draw to the place.
Yeah.
John is much more entrenched in the esoteric. These are things that he has studied for a long time.
Right.
And I was really only introduced to some of the esotericism by John just a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And I started getting my interest in that level. Egypt was a draw for me because, well, I love Egyptology.
Yeah. I
loved studying about the pharaohs. I loved studying specifically as it related to the Moses and the Exodus story. And, of course, as you take these stories and you learn about them, I don't know if you guys all went to Sunday school or synagogue or whatever when you were kids, but when you go to church and you learn these stories, they're very interesting, and you don't even think about how they piece together until you step outside that box and look back at it.
Yeah.
So now, wait a minute. Is there a historical backdrop to this that is plausible or accurate? And that was really the commonality between John and I that drew us together to Egypt, was studying for that particular book that we wrote, because we both have different theories on who we believe Moses may have been. and the dating system and so on. And so we wrote about that. And so that's the common love right there, was really seeking out the answers for those. And John is still on that. I mean, they're at their site of Gebel El Silsila, which is a quarry site. And you wouldn't think there's much in a quarry. This is where they hacked out the stones and hauled them downriver to Upper Egypt and to all the temples and so on. And Gebel El Silsila happens to be the quarry where a lot of stone for a lot of temples in Luxor came from. But as you go back through the eras, it's covered with hieroglyphs, it's covered with demotic text, it's covered with pictographs, it's covered with all kinds of things. Some of the things they found there are unbelievable. And they could very well be changing history with some of the things they've found and uncovered there. But it's a very interesting site. And so that's the love for John, and of course his wife Maria, who is the chief archaeologist there. But that draws me as well. I'm very interested in that. And our characters in this book both show up at Gebel El Silsila in big ways, and from the different eras that they represent. Which, by the way, our two characters for Moses are really only separated by about 2 generations and 80 years in Egyptian history. Same royal family. We have some of the same back-end conclusions, but just 2 different characters that we have chosen to put the story on for various reasons.
Just to go back to the Sphinx, what is it exactly? It looks half lion. It has a pharaoh's head. What exactly does it portray? What's it supposed to be?
Nobody knows exactly what it was in its original form. I think it's pretty telltale, and we've all heard this 100 times.
Yeah.
That head was obviously recarved, and so this could have been a product of the head being damaged and somebody recarving it. It could have been a product of the next ruler coming along and saying, I want my face up there and not a lion or whatever it originally was. And it could have been a lion. It seems to have, we don't know for certain. There's no way to know. But we do know that the head is small and out of proportion. And so it's interesting when you look at it. And I think we've also misdated the Sphinx. The Sphinx may be much older than we once thought it was. You talk to a man like Dr. Robert Schock and John Anthony West, who both of them, they wrote the book on it. They believe that a lot of the erosion on the Sphinx was water damage. Whereas John says, no, it's inconsistent with water damage. It's sand damage. And of course, you did have the Nile River ran a hell of a lot closer to the Sphinx and the pyramids than it does now. It's a good couple of miles off, if not more, now.
One more question on Egypt, and then we're going to move on to another subject.
Yeah, do you think they'll ever find the elusive library, which is rumored to be connected to the Sphinx?
I don't know. If it exists, it may have already been found. Dr. Zawi Hawass made some big to-do about that, and says and still claims to have discovered something under there. It may have been found. It may have been removed. I would think if it was of great historical import, though, that even Hawass would have made that public. You can't shut that man up. He would have made that a public thing. So I know that there's with Edgar Casey and all of there's a lot of talk about what lies underneath that Sphinx, and I believe that they've found tunnels under there. They found chambers underneath. But it's either nothing came of it or they're keeping it secret. That's all anybody really knows who's in the know right now.
Yeah, because when you look at the Sphinx, you're only seeing about a third of it, aren't you? The rest of it's buried.
Well, you're seeing all the way down to the bottom of the paws and the belly of the Sphinx and all of that. You're seeing the entire structure, but what you're not seeing is what lays underneath, which could just be rooms. Like many of these temples that are out there have underground passages, underground chambers, underground rooms. I was at Menedot Habu. It's one of the temples in Luxor. And when you're out in the compound there, you see the big facade of the big pylon, and there's a couple of stony structures that pop up out of the ground, and you can walk down inside one of these. It looks like a crumbled wall that might be 8 feet tall with loose stone around it, and it's in kind of a triangular shape. And you go through the doorway, and you can go all the way down about 30 feet into the ground, good 10 meters or so into the ground, and you're down at what they call the Nilometer, which is there's almost pure water down in the bottom from the groundwater that comes up in there. And John actually baptized his son in there, so there's all kinds of underground chambers. John is also a dowser, by the way, and he had at Menadot Habu had done a lot of dowsing for some of the researchers there and the archaeologists there, and had mapped out several rooms and chambers and hallways and all of that's under what looks like a big open parade ground in front of the pylon that connects over to the Nilometer. And so it's very interesting. There's a lot of things down in the ground in Egypt that have not yet been found. I mean, even very recently, just new tombs they're finding in Luxor, in the Valley of the Kings, in the Valley of the Nobles. They're finding, and this is places I've been with John. It's from where his house is. You could drive in a car 5 minutes and get to all of these sites. He's about 5 to 10 minutes from Deir el-Bahri, the temple of Hatshepsut and of Ramesses II and of Amenhotep, son of Hapu, and all of these temples are all in like a big line around here on the east side of the Theban mountains, while the Valley of the Kings is on the other side of the range. Just a 5-minute drive around in a circle to get there. And so we're in these places, and they're still finding tombs. And these are places where there were even villages built into the side of the Valley of the Nobles from 150 years ago, and some people were still living in them up until a couple of years ago, and they would actually tunnel down into their basements. They'd dig beneath their house, and they would find antiquities, and that's what they found. The government took over the village, replaced all the people, and tore down the village, and keeping up only a few houses for historical value because it's a very old village. But underneath, the locals, even up to a few years ago, were digging underneath their houses and finding antiquities. And so there's still lots of things to be found over there.
Right, okay. I've just got Andy has got a quick question for you about Egypt, I think. Have you, Andy?
Yeah, just a quick question really about obviously the political changes that have taken place in Egypt for the last few years. Have they had much effect upon Egyptology and research? I mean, I know the government initially for a while put Hawat actually in prison, I believe, or was sitting under a house arrest for a while before releasing him again. So I just wondered what kind of effect that's actually had.
Well, there's always been problems in Egypt, especially the last couple of 100 years. There's always some political thing. The way John described it to me a few years ago, he says it starts with one man shaking his fist at another man and then throwing their sandals, and then it's rocks, and then it's eventually became Molotov cocktails, and then it's a couple of guns, and then it blows all over hell, and then it goes back to sandals. And he said it's been that way all the time. And even now with the whole ISIS threat over in the Middle East, which is, when you think about it, it's really almost a couple of thousand miles away, 1,500 miles at the least. And but they are also into Libya. They've gone into the Sinai now. And but Egypt, the current president of Egypt, El-Sisi, he has really stepped up the security and the military against ISIS. The current atmosphere over in Egypt right now is, from a distance, people are afraid to go there. But when you're there, you see how secure and how friendly it is. We took 10 people with us there last year, and there were some people that were a little afraid to go. And yet we found the Egyptian people themselves very welcoming and warm and wanting us there. We were on a beach at Aswan it was on February 22nd, which was the birthday of Ramesses II. And at his big monument, the monument, Abu Simbel, with the big the huge four-seated figures of Ramesses carved in the hills. Now they've moved that. They had to move it because of the flooding caused by the Aswan Dam 20-plus years ago. But they kept the alignments right. And on his birthday, February 22nd, the sun rises and shines into the front door of the temple and illuminates the four statues back in the Holy of Holies of the temple there. And so we were there on the beach with 10,000, by all reports, it was 10,000 Egyptians there on the beach with us, and they're all dancing and singing and greeting us, and where are you from? They would ask us, and it was a wonderful time. So the political atmosphere is tainted, I believe, by Western news media. It's a little more sensationalized. As for the archaeological work, there's always going to be wrenches in the gears. But as for John and Maria right now, they've had the site of Gebel El Silsila, and that's how close to home it is for me to be able to answer that question, is that while they have their constant red tape problems, and the red tape problems in Egypt, believe me, are different than the red tape problems in Great Britain or the United States. It could just be that somebody doesn't feel right that day and something changes in your paperwork. But they have noticed much more freedom even doing this year. This was their first season where they could actually move sand, so to speak. Let's just keep it in simple terms like that. Yeah. The last 3 years prior to that, they were just doing epigraphic survey and a surface survey. And this year was the first year they've been able to actually dig into the sand. And some amazing finds. And much more amazing than you might think for a quarry. And so the archaeological atmosphere there seems to be very good, and the current minister of antiquities is very supportive. And as a matter of fact, I think John and Maria might be, along with some other people, meeting him for dinner next week, if I'm not mistaken, or sometime in the near future for something. So I can't say anything about that, but so the atmosphere is very good there, and it's not tainted by – the only thing that would taint it by current politics over in the whole Middle East, which is actually – the Middle East is not Egypt. Egypt is Northern Africa. But because of all the military action over there in Libya and the Sinai and Jordan and all of these places, and Israel, of course, in the middle of all of it, you're going to have there's obvious security risks. There's a lot more security there on the tourist sites. John said there were thousands of tourists in Cairo and Luxor, but there's almost 2 armed guards, military, for every tourist. Yeah. So they're trying to keep it as safe as possible.
Yeah, I was there 2005 on holiday, and the military presence and the police presence is pretty strong. Obviously, they recognise it's part of their biggest industry, and they can't risk losing the tourists. Also, right. I'm a teacher myself, qualified a couple of years back now, and a couple of colleagues of mine who trained actually got jobs in Egypt, in Cairo, teaching in an English school, not teaching English, teaching school. And they're saying they're having an absolute whale of a time. they work about 4 hours a day, their accommodation's paid for, food's paid for. I mean, they're loving it, absolutely loving it out there. They've seen no trouble or issues or difficulties.
I know a lot of Westerners. And I include Great Britain in Western civilization. I know a lot of Westerners that are living in Egypt, live in Cairo. They say, it's bad in certain areas. There's certain problems that we face, but life goes on here. And a lot of them in Luxor, a lot of expats in Luxor that still say right now Luxor is very depressed. And Egypt is very depressed. With people not traveling there, of course, that has really hurt their economy. And they're starving for Westerners, Great Britain, from America to come over and visit. And I say, please come, please come. It's safe here. It's safe here. You even had Zahi Hawass. I saw him on a video from about a half a year ago saying, well, not even that far ago, a few months ago. And he said, Egypt is safe. And so he said, come to Egypt. So absolutely, there you go.
Well, until they go back at some point, I definitely hope so.
Yes.
Okay. Right, now I want to go over to one of your books, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, if I've pronounced that right. Yes. Now, it basically talks about these creatures, I assume they're creatures, born of the Watchers that are supposed to have had sex with women and created these hybrid offspring. Could you tell us a bit more about them and whether they're still with us? If not, how did they die?
Sure. It's the Nephilim, and it's interesting. This is another one of those cases where when you learned about the flood story and Noah and the ark and all of this when you were in Sunday school as a kid, you never heard the teacher say, and what started it all was there were these beings that came down and had sex with human women, and they bequeathed up. We didn't learn that in Sunday school. And it was as I got older and in seminary and I was reading some of these passages, I would ask, what does this mean? Why were we never taught this before? Because you go to Genesis 6 and it talks about And in those days, the sons of God came down and intermingled with the daughters of men and had children by them. And they were known as the Nephilim, and they were on the earth in those days. And there's only 4 verses that mention them, and then it goes right into the account of Noah and the ark. And so it's linked. It's like the preamble to the story of Noah.
Yeah.
And there were many things linguistically that I asked questions about in seminary. I said, you guys teach us that language means something in systematic theology. It means something. You have to look at, when you look at an ancient text like this, you have to determine, first of all, what language it was written in, to whom it was written, and what the people it was written to would have perceived it to mean in their context, not by our 20th or 21st century contextual understanding. And so when you start looking at it and answering, you see there's a different story here than we were taught. And of course, the sons of God being synonymous with what the Book of Enoch, one of the apocryphal books, called the Watchers. And that's one of those, it's like the Anunnaki, the Nephilim, the Watchers. These are all just big words in ancient alien circles and in ancient origins, alternative origin circles that have been just thrown around and become almost mystical just in their usage altogether. And what I see the sons of God as in the Old Testament, these Watchers, in the Hebrew, in the Genesis text where it talks about the sons of God, the Hebrew calls them, it's translated from the B'nai Ha-Elohim, and it's the children of, or the sons of, or those of the Elohim. And you start looking into who the Elohim are. And in the Old Testament, there were many names for God, one of them being Elohim. And Elohim was the name used for God descriptively in the Old Testament almost 2,700 times. And so it was the one used the most. But when you define Elohim from the Hebrew, it's a plural word. It's got this him ending on the end, just like Nephilim. It's got the him is a suffix that stands for plurality, turning a singular word into a plural word. So like Nephilim is Nephal is the word, and him is the plural suffix, connoting plurality. So like in Nephilim, it means those who fell, Nephal does, falling or falling down or coming down or leaving one place and going to another place. And that's what Nephal meant. And we put the him on it, just meant those who did those things. Now Elohim, by definition, El is the name for God in the Old Testament, El in English. And Elohim just simply means God of many gods. And you've seen now rabbinic schools and Christian circles will all define that as meaning, well, that obviously doesn't mean a plurality. It means a singular God with a multiplicity of majesty and power. And I would say when that came up, I would ask the question and say, well, it doesn't say that. It's a plurality. It doesn't say anything about power. It doesn't say anything about majesty. It's talking about the being itself being plural. And you even see the word Elohim used. It's used as simply in the Old Testament to say, and a man who carved idols out of wood and made them out of clay and bronze and silver and gold was selling these Elohim out of his tent. It was a plurality for gods. And you see it especially in Psalm 82 where it says, and God, and it says, and Elohim stood in the midst of the Elohim, and he said to them, you are all Elohim, the bright shining princes of heaven. Then he goes on to pass judgment on them for something. And so Elohim is really the beginning of the Nephilim. And the Elohim, it says, came down and intermingled with the daughters of men and had children by them. And it says in the book of Enoch, it expands on it, and it says they chose anyone they loved and they cohabited with them. And so it wasn't a thing of this evil fallen race of angels, which is a mistranslation and had nothing to do with angels. Because angels in the Hebrew is malach or malachi for the plural, or malachim. And the Elohim are gods. So I started to get this picture that, wait a minute, I wonder if the Elohim really represent a polytheistic stable was the word that came to mind. That's not what I meant. A polytheistic caste of gods in ancient Hebrews, to the ancient Hebrews. And I think this is where we have misdefined some things in the Old Testament, is that the Old Testament is not monotheistic. I believe it's polytheistic. And the polytheism is in the Elohim. The Elohim were a caste of gods and minor gods, just like that's where I think you see all these similarities in all these different cultures, the Greek gods, the Roman gods, the Anunnaki, the Elohim. These are all different representations of the same thing, of this multiplicity of gods. And that, of course, begs the question, do they really exist? We don't know for sure. So when I talk about this stuff, I try to keep it in the realm of, I'm talking about ancient religious mythology, just to be safe. Because if we say we believe in, biblically speaking, if we believe in God and we believe in the Holy Spirit and we believe in Jesus Christ, his only begotten Son, and so if we believe in all those, you would have to believe then also that the Nephilim are a caste of godlike characters that Elohim was the chief god of, which is, by the way, Elohim was not the same God as Jehovah. And so they're I got to tell you this, just on the side, every time I say Jehovah, I always think of Monty Python. Jehovah! So, sorry about that. That always comes to mind whenever I say it. I'm almost pronouncing Jehovah. So anyway, I don't know if I answered your question in there anymore,
you did.
I rambled on a bit.
You remind me a bit of Mika Hanks, I must admit. We had him on the show, and but you're not as bad as him. At least we can get a word in edgeways.
Oh, did you say Micah Hanks?
Micah Hanks, yeah.
Oh, Micah Hanks, the mouth of the South.
At least we could get a word in edgeways with you.
Mike is a dear friend of mine, and he actually founded the Paradigm Symposiums with me. And Micah is somebody where I can just go to Micah and say, Micah, do you have any information on the origins of cake? And he'll say, well, I was talking to my friend, Dr. So-and-so, and he was talking about the flour that came from the Andes Mountains and he will just go on. He could go on for a half an hour talking about making of cake.
Well, talking on God, some people think that it could be possible that he is an extraterrestrial. What do you think?
Well, I think he's definitely not terrestrial.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps, and I state this in my book, I say extraterrestrial, and I divide the words out, extra-terrestrial. I mean, simply meaning not of this earth.
Yeah.
And so God is an extraterrestrial already, I think, meaning he doesn't live here. He's from somewhere else out there. Now, is he extraterrestrial in the sense that, say, ancient aliens might define him? That I don't know for sure. I don't think we will know until we meet him, if we ever do.
Yeah.
And I do tend to think, and I first got this notion when I was a little kid watching Star Trek, of all things, the original series, which was in its reruns when I was a young kid. And that's where I first got the concept that a god could possibly just be an extraterrestrial with a lot of power, that the people who saw him and encountered him interpreted as a god. And so I even say in that book, perhaps what we thought were gods, angels, devils, demons, and everything in between were different castes or different characters that were extraterrestrial, just simply not of this world.
Yeah.
Visitors, if you will. But again, that I have to make very clear is a notion. There is no way yet that we have to define that as being factual. We can come up with ideas. And I think the problem we have in these circles is that too many people hear an idea, and they go, oh, hey, that sounds great. I think I believe that. But they don't realize it's an idea that has no real founding in knowing anything for a fact. So a lot of this information, say we've got the Nephilim story, but we don't know what they really were. We don't even really, when it comes down to it, we don't really know that they even existed.
So you don't think it's Bigfoot that could be a Nephilim?
I mentioned that only in passing in my book as being all these different cultures that have stories of giant or big characters that, and I mentioned the Native American had their Sasquatch, while, the Celts, the ancient Celts had their Tuatha De Danann, while the ancient Hebrews had their Nephilim. So there's no telling for sure. Sasquatch, that's another one of those things. There seems to be a lot of evidence that something exists there. However, we don't know anything else about it.
No.
We've never encountered one that we can say somebody has sat down and been able to research it or even talk to it or telepathy, whatever it might be. I hear people saying, well, I've channeled that, Sasquatch is it. And I say, well, I can't doubt your story from the perspective that you believe you had it, but you're the only one who experienced that. So experience, as they say, is anecdotal to evidence, because one man's experience is another man's, cuckoo fantasy story, or vice versa. And I think that a lot of people, I've had experiences. I can tell you that. I've had experiences in ghosts, if they're ghosts. I've had experiences in things, and I'm a fairly pragmatic guy, not given to these flights of fancy, but I've had my experiences that I come out believing in something. And yet I cannot convince anybody that I had the experience. If I took it back to Moses, I'd say, Moses wrote about having seen God in a burning bush. Well, you know what? He was the only guy there.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody else recorded that. Nobody else saw it. Nobody else experienced it. But he builds and codifies an entire religion on the basis of that experience. So there's the big question. Did it really happen?
Yeah.
Or was it a figment of Moses' imagination? We don't know. We accept in certain circles by faith that it happened. I think we do that with our people in the ghost field, with people in the UFO field, people in the abduction field. These are all people that have their stories, and they say, I can prove it to you, but they can't really prove it to me. They can just prove to me that they experienced something.
Yeah.
So
David Lloyd is in the chat room, and he's asking the question to you on the subject of giants. There's a place in Romania that they found called in the Brusigi Mountains, and apparently he said he's wondering what you think about what they have found there. It's said to be force fields and a holographic library, as well as much more giants said to be there. Sounds way out to him. What do you think?
Well, David, I've only just heard about this stuff rather than study it. I haven't researched it. I haven't looked into it. You'd think because it deals with some of the things that I talk and write about, I would have gotten into this, and I haven't. I've been so busy. It's one of those things that say, one of these days I got to look into this. I don't know much about it other than having heard about it.
Yeah.
I would say, though, that there are red flags for me, probably like you, David. As soon as you hear we discovered these giants and there were holographic libraries, and you say, okay, right there, I start to, what kicks in is my skepticism. And I say, all right, that's a little too far for me to take it. We're discovering holographic libraries underground now, or wherever it is. That's the stuff of fantasy. Now, if it's real, it'd be damn cool to find out if it was real, to be able to go in there and research that and get some good firsthand information on research being done there. But you hear all these claims like this, and these are those things where I say you don't know what people are doing to either be fraudulent, or maybe there's an honest attempt to pass on what they think is accurate information that they've heard. But it comes across as you have to choose to believe whether it's a real story or not. And when there's fact, you don't have to believe anything. It's just there. You know it. I would be very interested to find out if the people who actually found this are coming out and writing about it and doing appearances about it and talking about it and showing photographs, showing their research information. If that's true, I'd be very interested to look at their information. But it sounds obscure enough to be, if not an out-and-out hoax, it's probably something that's been built up from that doesn't really exist, or somebody is speculating on something or hypothesizing on something, or purely just making up a story that sounds good to go along, or they think that's there, or the spirit of Zazu, communicated with them through their tea leaves, and they said, I know that this is real, and not to be mocking of it or flippant about it, but that's the way some of this information we find out gets to us. Well, I channeled somebody from the Pleiades. Okay. All right. Move on.
Right.
Moving on.
Okay. Thank you, David, for your question anyway. I want to take you into the world of ghost hunting, Scotty, if I may. I believe you and John have both experienced this with, was it your good friend Barry Fitzgerald?
Yes, Barry Fitzgerald. He did not actually go on this with us, but he heard last year for our Paradigm Symposium. Both John and Barry were here in the house for about a week before the symposium.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to Barry getting there, John and I had gone with Rocky Stucci, who runs the radio network with us, and he has a house over in the suburb of Minneapolis. It's an old house. It's been there since the 1850s, one of the original houses in the area. And apparently a quote-unquote roadhouse that serviced the military fort, which had been there for many years at that point, Fort Snelling. On their trek out west, they would go past this roadhouse. Well, we were in there, and we experienced some very interesting things. I've been on these paranormal investigations in the past, and John had not been on one quite like this before. Although I will say, in Egypt, John and I together have encountered some very off the scale things that
Really?
Our whole programs in themselves just to talk about them. But so we're in the house, and we encountered things. And Rocky was a very seasoned paranormal investigator. We ran into things that evening in just the hour and a half that we spent at that house, early evening in October, surpassed anything he'd ever experienced, and certainly anything I'd ever heard. And we had, of course, as for EVPs, we had dozens of those on the tape, ranging from very low quality to sounding like somebody was standing right next to us with their voice echoing off the walls in the same room. Was uttering. We had two Frenchmen talking to us that we didn't hear audibly when we were there, but they were on the recording while we were talking. You could hear two Frenchmen talking, and they actually ended the conversation. One of them says, "Mandu." He says like that, and just with the same mannerism at the end, and it sounded as if I'm talking to you now.
Yeah.
And it was echoing off the wood floors and the walls of this empty house, and we had things like that. We had the experience we had was we were all sitting in the basement, and very quiet, and we were just waiting. Rocky had a little device, and we were just waiting to see if anything would respond, and it was very quiet. I was sitting on the stairway that led up to the kitchen doorway, and John had left a micro recorder up on the countertop in the kitchen. And while we're sitting down there, we hear this big bang, just crash or bang all in one, and you could actually feel the vibration of it, and it was loud. And I think I stood up and said something like, "Hello!" And I said, "It's upstairs." And we all went running up into the kitchen. Of course, there's nothing in the house. There's no furniture. There's no doors to slam that weren't already shut. There were no windows that weren't painted shut. No cabinets in the kitchen. It had all been redone, but nothing was finished, and there was nothing in the house. And it sounded like somebody had taken a metal extension ladder and dropped it on the wooden floor, is what the sound was. And so we couldn't find anything out of line. And while we're walking around, immediately after that happened, you hear us on the recording, and I'm saying things like, "Well, thank you." And you hear this huffing voice, and it went I'm going to mimic it here for a second. It sounded exactly like this, going from left to right on the speakers in stereo. It went, and then it said, "You're welcome," just like that. And we didn't know if he was like out of breath getting there or what it was, but so the big bang, Barry listened to it a couple of days after it happened, and he said he had experienced some of these things like up in the caves. He's doing a lot of his research up into the caves in Ireland. And as a matter of fact, we have our big Irish trip coming up that Barry's going to be taking us in June with about 15 people up into those caves, and also on an investigation of Leap Castle. And but Barry said that sounded to him, he said, the only thing I can describe that as, sounds kind of funny, he said, but I call it a spiritual sonic boom. He says it's like there is so much spiritual energy built up, it just like it really just go bang. And if you listen to the recording, you actually hear it going at the very beginning. It'll start for a brief second. It'll go click, 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 bang. Just like that. And
Is
it's
this
almost
the
like
one that Rocky Stucci was on, did you say?
Yes, he was there on this. And he's the one who brought us.
I found it, so I'll just...
Oh, you may have found it.
Yeah, I'll see if I can play it.
It's very short.
All right.
And it's only short.
It's only 26 seconds. So.
Yeah, so let's see what...
There is some foul language in there. When we're running up the steps, Rocky said to me after the fact, he said the funniest sight was being from down below, watching you go up the steps first to where the and John following you, and he said if he could have crawled through you and come out your mouth, he said he'd have been out that door. And John uttered the famous line, which is in that recording, "Get me out of this effing house." So we tease him for that miserably.
Right.
So.
That was an EVP of somebody saying yes.
Oh, that was something about somebody saying yes. I don't think it's the same one. So,
If you hear the bang,
Scotty asked if there are more than 9 spirits there. Is that the same one?
no, that's a
No, that's a different
that's
one.
a completely different one.
Okay.
This would be called the Big Bang or something like that if he's got a word on it. I've actually got it here, but I don't know that you could hear it. So, because I don't have my computer running through my soundboard to play a sound.
Let's have a look, see if I can find it. I know I found it earlier.
I have got it here, and I could probably play it through my microphone, and you could at least get an idea if you're open to that.
Yeah, give it a try.
Give it a try.
Let's see. Let me go find it here for you very quickly. It's at what we call, or Rocky has dubbed it, the Fernhill House, and the Fernhill House is over in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. It's a southern suburb of Minneapolis, and let's see, it's right here. This is called, we have it, huffing is what we call it. I'm going to call this up, and let me see if my microphone will pick this up. Now, it'll start out with a little silence. You hear a little talking. That's coming off of the little spirit box that Rocky has. Okay. And then you hear the big bang. Let's see if this mic picks this up. Hang on. We'll give it a shot.
What's it over? Hello, thank you for the sound. What was that? Hello, is down here? Hey, thank you. Thank you for the sound.
Okay, so that's where you heard the stuff that was going on.
Wow.
And I don't know how clearly you could hear that.
That wasn't too bad, actually.
Oh, good. But you could hear that big bang, and it started off with that little ticking.
Yeah.
And then the huffing sound and the "you're welcome," or "welcome," I think is how it comes out. There's actually a little trail on the beginning of that that says "welcome." So that was an interesting experience for us. And John was ready to leave after that. And it's funny, you know, he encounters all this stuff in Egypt, and he's into the esoterics and into the much darker esotericism of it all, I guess you could say. And he and his wife have experienced some very strange things over there. And yet when you put him in this setting, it's a little different for him. And so he was a little shook up by that one. And so there's a lot more that happened at that house, but we were only there for about an hour and a half, and it was so incredibly and utterly active. It was almost unbelievable.
It's a very strange thing with ghost hunters. We go out asking for that, and as soon as we get it, we want to leave.
Yes, exactly. There is a very interesting story. John, a couple of months ago, was in London at the College of Psychic Studies. That was actually founded, I think, in part by Edgar Rice Burroughs, or not Edgar Rice, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yeah.
And it's been around. It's been in that same building, downtown London. And they gave him the key, and that's where he stayed. He stayed in a little room that was actually Henry James's seance room. Was now the bedroom that he was staying in up on the 4th floor.
Wow.
And he was there by himself all night, all alone. And for the week that he was there. And we had him on the radio show on Sunday night. And I'm sorry, it was the Thursday afternoon radio show that we do, because it was about 9 in the evening there for him.
Yeah.
He was sitting in the library, and we were teasing him live on air about, well, John, did you ask the spirits to come and visit you there? Did you record anything? He says, no. He says, no, I'm not going to do that. He says, I don't want to see them. I don't want to experience it. And as we're talking to him on the radio, he goes, He said, "Did you hear that?" And you listen right on the air, and you hear thumping coming from upstairs, banging. And he says, "There is nobody in this building." And then after the show, we listened back to that, and we caught an EVP where John was laughing and saying, "I don't want to meet any spirits tonight." and just before the thump, and you hear a voice, and it was, and pardon my accent, I'm not British, of course, but it sounded East End.
Yeah.
And it's somebody that said right after John said it, there's a little EVP that said, "Oh, he's all right." Just like that. And so it was interesting. Sometimes we catch some of these things live on the program, which is interesting to me.
What is your theory of the afterlife? Where do you think we go? Do we go home like they said in Independence Day?
I think the hardest part about deciphering the afterlife is none of us have been there and back.
Yeah.
And those that have these OBEs or ODEs, ADEs, what do they call them, after death experience, out of body experience, and so on, is that we really don't know what they're encountering. They haven't really fully been there, but they're given this information. Go to the light and all of this, or don't go to the light and stay. And we don't really know. If you put it in a religious context, of course, there were many numbers of years that I knew exactly where I was going after I died. I was going to go to heaven, and the heaven is described in the Bible, and so on. And now I just don't know anymore, because it's just another version of another religion's afterlife place that you go. So I don't really know where we go. I don't know what's there. And this is where the waters get so muddied, because you'll have a lot of New Agers, you have a lot of spiritualists, a lot of these type of people that will say, well, they've channeled with this person or talked to that person on the other side. I've had people talking to people that I know on the other side, and the information given is quite accurate. And frankly, as you hear everybody say who tries to convince them that their story is unique, that it's information nobody would have known.
Yeah.
And I get that information comes gleaning across, and you say, okay, who is delivering that information? Is it the spirit of the person that I knew? Is it the spirit of a person who's passed over? Is it demonic? Is it interdimensional? Is it being hoaxed by somebody on the other side? Is there something out there that wants to lead us to think something that isn't so? Is it all fake? We don't know. And that's the big problem we face.
Now you class yourself as a theologian. Could you let some of our members of the public chat room who don't know what that is, describe what that is, and also tell me how you balance your belief in God with the paranormal?
Sure. Well, to say that I am a theologian might be a bit of a misnomer. I have in recent days been called a fraud because I call myself a historian or a theologian when I don't have institutional credentials to back any of that up. And I say, well, I've been studying history for the last 35 years, and I write about history. To me, it makes me a historian. If you want to quibble and say, okay, I'm a rogue historian or I'm a amateur historian, that's fine. All it means I don't have a piece of paper that says I've studied it and got credential credits for it.
Yeah.
So the same thing with my theological training. I went to 2.5 years of Bible school without graduating. I dropped out. And then they started a small seminary through my church, and Dr. Charles Ailing was the president of the seminary at the time. He went to my church. He has now, by the way, been for the last almost 30 years the chair of history at the University of Northwestern. Plus, he's the president of the Near Middle East Archaeological Society. Very credentialed man. A good friend of mine still, but he asked me to come on to the seminary there, and they would tutor me in the balance of my bachelor's degree, and I could start work on my master's program, which I did. And then I dropped out of that after 2 years and went into advertising. I said, it doesn't pay as well being a seminary student as it does being an art director. And so I went into advertising. That's where I stayed for 25 plus years. And so my theological background is in a very conservative, fundamentalist, Baptist setting. And we knew everything. We knew everything there was to know about theology, and anybody who didn't believe what we believed were all going to hell. And that was pretty much as clear-cut as it was. And so there was a point in my life where, theologically speaking, I felt that I had all the answers, and I lived in a very small universe. And it wasn't until I started questioning that and looking out and saying, wait a minute, this is not the end-all and be-all of every answer that's out there. How do I explain this or that or the other thing? And there were many things I started to research, and the more I researched, the more I drew further away from a faith standpoint. Now, that got me to asking, perhaps this isn't really what you want to know, but this is part of this for me, is that it seemed that the Bible itself taught you that the more you study, the more weariness there is to it. You just need to believe by faith. You need to become with the faith of a little child. And that's the way it was interpreted for us. And I said, well, now wait a minute. I've got 6 kids, and there's not a one of them that hasn't come with a million questions. And so when I ask questions of God, I think that is being more like having the faith of a little child. And faith to me seems to be that thing that is, it requires no thinking. It requires no examination. It is as the Apostle Paul put it, is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And turned around, maybe, yeah. And that's what we were supposed to believe. Yet, it seems to me that the mature person, that's for babes, so to speak. You don't need to know that's the babe in you. A baby will come to me and trust me as their father, not ask any questions of me, but they might ask questions about the world around us. But as they get older, what does a child do? A child stretches out on their own, and they start to know things for themselves. And I think this is what happened to me. It's starting to say, I don't want to believe something by faith that is governed by fear or control, saying you will go to hell if you don't believe this. I said, I want to believe something because I know it is so. And of course I get told, well, then it doesn't require any faith to do that. And I said, well, bingo, it doesn't require faith to do that. Why does God, and this is the big question that maybe goes farther than you want me to go on this, but I would ask the question, if I put it in this context, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but this is the honesty of how I feel about all of this, is that if God indeed is real as the Bible portrays him, and if hell is a very real place that is meant for all eternity, all infinity, so infinite we can't wrap our finite minds around it, and the only way to avoid going there is to put your faith in something that has no substance other than what you choose to believe out of old manuscripts. I said, is there not something more solid than that God is going to give me to go on? If that's all there is to believing this, and of course anybody could pull that apart and say, well, there's this and this and this, and God works in your heart and you know it, and I've been there.
Yeah.
So the question for me becomes, how do I know what I believe? Doesn't the New Testament even say, these things are written so you may know what you believe? Well, I don't know those things. I find that those things, I used this comparison once. It's like walking into one of those big old theaters from the turn of the 20th century, and with the gilded arches and the gold proscenium arches and the big chandeliers and all the velvet seats. And it seems to me that it's like that. You can sit in any number of those velvet seats to look at the stage, and like differing religions looking for God, all of those seats have a vantage of the stage, but they all are from a different perspective. One might be from the orchestra, the other might be from an aisle, the other might be partially obscured by a pillar, the other might be from the balcony. But you're all still watching the same show up on stage. And the only thing that changes, the show doesn't change, it's just your perspective that changes. And so I wonder if that is what this is all about, really, is that God is something out there, the great unknown, the great afterlife. These are all things that none of us have experienced, but we're told from many different vantage points what it really is and who's really at the core of it all. But it's from many different perspectives.
Yeah.
And so that's really where I've ended up. That's as ambiguous an answer as I can give on that one.
Now, I want to talk about your books, just to let everybody know. You've done Lost Civilization and Secrets of the Past, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, Exodus Reality with John, The Secret History of the Reptilians.
Yes.
And then there's one on eBay that's nearly $1,000 to buy, apparently, for hard copy. The Rollicking Adventures of Tangled Hair.
I wish I could sell those for $1,000.
Beth Owsley asked a question, what is your next book?
Oh boy, I've got like 3 or 4 different things in the works, and we're trying to decide with our agent which is the best to pursue. Right now, I'll tell you this: John and I were approached about a year ago by some TV producers with Arts and Entertainment, A&E, and they had wanted us ask our agent if John and I would be willing to put together a proposal for a television series on history and so on. And so we devised something called History Trippers.
Yeah.
And we mapped out some episodes and so on. And now that is now sitting right now. And I've heard through these producers alone. These are the producers that actually produced the show The Bachelor, which is one of the highest rated. I never watch it, but it's one of the highest rated reality television shows over here. And but it took them 2 years to sell it. Now we've been a year into this. It's at a very big network right now that has expressed interest in it, and but there it sits, and we're playing the waiting game. But in association with that, our agent wants us to write a History Trippers book that sounds very banal on its surface, but she thought would be excellent, and that was something like, with a title something like, now hang on to your hats, guys, The 10 Most Whatever Places in Egypt. And John and I, when we first proposed that, we said, are you kidding me? That sounds so trite. And so, but she said, no, I want you to do this, to talk about you guys, how you met and all this stuff and all these different places you've gone. So we're working on that. I've been asked to do a trilogy. It's not sold anywhere yet, but to do a trilogy fictionalizing my version of who I feel Moses was from our book, The Exodus Reality, into a trilogy, and fictionalizing it and adding a lot of fictionalized meat on the bones and so on. That's an exciting. And John and I are currently working together on the Lost Armies of Cambyses, which deals with the Persian emperor who in 500 BC sacked Egypt and sent a 50,000 strong army out into the western deserts on a forced march 500 miles to the oasis of Siwa to kill the Ammonites and to destroy the oracle at Siwa. And according to Herodotus, the 4th century BC Egyptian historian, he said that a great sandstorm swept up and wiped out, engulfed the whole army, and they disappeared off the face of the earth forever. And this is one of those mysteries that even National Geographic sent a crew out trying to look for this a few years ago. And John believes he knows exactly where they are and what happened to them, because he's done a lot of expeditions out into the West. So we're writing a book called The Lost Armies of Cambyses. And he's working on one called The Hidden Hand. So there's a lot of things out there. I've got a sequel to Tam O'Hare that I've wanted to write for a long time.
Right.
So there's all kinds of little projects in the hopper. Which one hits the wall first, we're not sure.
Well, I've been screamed at about the reptilians, the lizard people. That people want to. Some people want to know about the reptilians. What is it about them?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. That book came up as I proposed 5 different books to my publisher after Nephilim came out. My publisher asked me, so what do you want to write next? And I said, cool. That's a nice lead-in for a contract. And I said, well, and I gave him a couple of different proposals, and he chose the reptilian one, which kind of dovetailed off of the Nephilim book. And I said, I don't really know a lot about the reptilian factor. I said, but I will start researching it and I'll write this book. And I knew enough to start writing, but as I researched it, I was finding out that I was writing less and less about a reptilian race per se and giving answers about it than I was writing about the mythology, the ancient mythology of it, as well as the modern day mythos, if you will. It's almost the religion building that modern humans place around this. And it's I wrote an awful lot psychologically why we as humans need these types of beings in our lives. Or in our existence to either fantasize or try to find out whether or not they exist. And so I started writing about it and talking about how the reptilians really where they were sourced. And there was even one point in the book where I stopped while I was writing because I wanted to put a number in there. I wanted to say I Google searched reptilian aliens. And so I Google searched it live as I was writing that chapter, and I came up with 1.6 million references to alien reptilians. And as I looked at the first top 10 that came up on a Google search, I found that 8 of them had the identical story, all written out in narrative as their facts for how the reptilian race came to Earth. And it was all plagiarized from someone or one or the other or some original source, and they were all almost verbatim, the same words. And yet there was no sources mentioned on any of them. And they were giving all these facts like, well, the reptilian race, they came from the Pleiades system. And they are not the Pleiades, I'm sorry, the star system of Draco. And I thought, oh, how convenient. Draco, maybe that's where they got the name, Reptilians, Draco, dragon. And they came from Draco, and they ended up on Earth, and they subjugated man, and they went to war with the first I'd ever heard of it, the terrestrial reptilians. It came from the underground caverns of the Earth. And they all started warring with each other, and the subterranean ones won over the extraterrestrial ones, and they were subdued and went to the background, and now they run everything like it's worse than the Illuminati, from behind the Illuminati. And you hear the voice, I start talking about this stuff, and I'm just like, you just want to go into cartoon voice almost, because you say, that's great information. Can somebody please give me your source points? And nobody can give me source points other than you hear, there's this guy, and this was very sincere. It was somebody I know who is a forensic psychologist, said there's somebody I know that I've talked to who was former military, very deep covert, and they know his records. But he talks about having been introduced to these reptilian beings, and it's all over the planet and this and that. But this is a guy who also can't step outside an institution. And so you wonder, did this drive him insane? Is he insane because of what he learned? Is he insane? Is he repeating this because of he's insane? Or is it severe PTSD? We don't know. And so you hear all these kinds of stories, but there's no proof in the pudding. There's no source points. There's just a lot of things like saying, I know there was a third man on the grassy knoll that shot JFK in the head. And if you try to go any further than that, you can't find any evidence. So it puts in an
Andy.
Did you just say it was you?
I just think there's a rather lot of evidence, actually. There was someone on the grassy knoll, but that's another story. So.
Yes. Yeah, and there is a lot of evidence. I'm just being flippant. But but of course, here's the problem with any of this kind of stuff. You'll get a lot of people theorizing without giving you very much information to go on. And or it's a scant piece of evidence in something that says, and they build a whole theory out of it. And so that's the danger with all of this stuff. So my book on the reptilians is, I think the best thing about that book is that it doesn't really go into the reptilians. It goes into why we believe in the reptilians. It goes into the Anunnaki. It goes into Enki. I spent a lot of time on why some of the reptilian factors connected to Enki and Enki Ea. And as some of this you probably already know, and some of this comes from Sitchin, some of it comes from other sources. But one of the things that I repeat and say, the only problem with this is we don't really know the source point of all of this. But in the Anunnaki legend, it's very similar to the book of Genesis and the Garden of Eden. So much so that you would say Moses, the man who most probably wrote the book of Genesis, borrowed an awful lot of this information from the Sumerian culture when he was writing about Eden. Because you have Enlil, who's also known as Elil, is the chief god of the Anunnaki. He conscribes his brother god Enki, also known as Ea, to create primeval man, to do our work for us, to dig our canals, to mine our resources, to till our ground for us, and so on. And then down the road, you have in these cuneiform texts, you have the king Atrahasis of the humans pleads to his god Enki to please deliver us from this bondage to the gods. And it sounds almost biblical when you get it out of the translations, out of the cuneiform. You've got Enki saying, and Enki heard the words of his servants and bent his ear to the plight of his servant. And he and his mighty men rose up out of the great Abzu, the underground sea, to the serpent's marsh which surrounded the city of Eridu, which was the place he loved to go, and his boatmen would take him there. And Enki, Ea, the god, gave the forbidden knowledge of the gods to Atrahasis, the human king, and helped him defeat the gods in a war, and they won their freedom. And for this, Enlil conscribes Enki, Ea, to the subterranean caverns of the earth to dwell forever with his followers. And then you've got the story about 1,500 years later or more written down by Moses, which talks of instead of Elil, he's got through, I think, the transmission of religion and movement from the Euphrates River Valley into the Canaanite region. You had Elil becomes El or Elohim, El Shaddai, El Elyon, the God of the Bible. You've got Enki, who's known as Iyah, becomes the same base word for Yahweh, which is Jehovah. You've got instead of the Serpent's Marsh, which is where Enki rises up, which, by the way, was also called, Enki's other name was Iyah. It was called Iyah's Den, from which was derived Eden or Eden. In the Genesis story, you have Eden, and instead of them mining their resources and tilling the ground for the Anunnaki, you've got God placing Adam and Eve in the garden to till the ground and keep it for him. And then you've got the serpent, who is really a serpent character. His name is Nakash. And I cover this in both Reptilians and in the Nephilim book, but Nakash, never called Satan, never called the devil, never called Lucifer in the passage in Genesis, but the serpent is called Nakash. Satan was ascribed 1,000 years later. Yeah. But Nakash, by definition, is it's the bringer of knowledge, the trickster, the bringer of chaos, which just simply meant turning things on its ear. He was the bright shining one, he's called, which relates to the bright shining Elohim of Psalm 82 and the bright shining gods of the Tuatha De Danann, if you will. And so you've got these characters that all come in, and this Nakash brings the forbidden knowledge by saying, you will not surely die. And I think there's more encoded message there, and we can't go into it all right now. But all of that to say that all of this from the Reptilians has much deeper roots than just outer space reptilians that came to subjugate us.
Yes, Zach, I was just saying in our chat room, there's something very deep in the human psyche about serpents, as the otherness of serpents.
Certainly.
The non-human, the opposite. I'm a psychotherapist by trade and quite interested in psychotherapy, so obviously the serpent concept is something that's deep in the collective unconscious, so yeah.
The whole Kundalini aspect of that. And I actually, in the book, I used Freud and Adler and went back to them and said these two are considered to be the fathers of modern psychology, which has changed dramatically, of course, since their day, as you can attest to. Sure. But, I used their modes of psychotherapy for developing why people needed these things, these types of things. Yes. And you could even extend that into gods. And you hate to say it because you don't really know God doesn't exist. But at the same time, you want to say it seems at times that we've created these things for ourselves.
Yes, it fills the gaps in our understanding of the universe and the world around us to have these things existing.
Absolutely.
And again, what you're saying before previously, the whole concept of knowledge is the opposite of faith. That knowledge destroys faith, and knowledge then itself can be seen as being somehow negative or bad because it's destroying the need for faith, whereas most religions talk about faith primarily. So the two oppose each other.
If I may, I will give you a hearty amen to that.
Okay. Was
Just
there
a very
question
quick
you
question
wanted,
from
Andy?
me. Is there something that you could give us, a short extract from a book, perhaps, or a little write-up of some kind? I don't know if you've heard, we actually have our own magazine online edition as well. I'm the editor of the magazine. I'm always looking for stuff from guests.
Oh, absolutely.
The magazine. So if I perhaps pop my email address to you, we're friends on Facebook, so perhaps I'll message.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes. That can be great.
Absolutely. Anything you want.
Just a couple more questions before we let you go, if that's okay, Scott.
Sure.
Now, we believe you've mentioned your Intrepid Radio. How long have you been doing it? And one guest that you've either had on or going to have on, Travis Walters. What do you think to his story?
If you could repeat a little bit of that, I swallowed my coffee down my lungs.
Right, just
I was coughing through most of that.
Right,
Sorry.
We're just about to interview Travis Walton.
Yeah. You're doing Intrepid Radio. How long have you been doing Intrepid Radio? And you're doing a Travis Walter interview, I believe?
Yes, we've been doing Intrepid Radio for almost 2 years now. I had done some radio before that, and John had never done radio before that, and it really came off of us both working on Intrepid magazine. Did you ask about Travis Walton?
Yeah. What's your
Yes.
theory on him? On his story?
It's interesting. I met Travis for the first time almost 4 years ago, I want to say. It was at a conference that we did in Taos, New Mexico. And I talked to him back then. And, of course, I saw the movie long before I knew anything about Travis, Fire in the Sky. And I thought it was very interesting. And I know people that know Travis very well. And tonight we're going to be talking to him about this just about 6 hours from now and 5 hours from now. And I find that his story, it's rife with controversy from the very beginning. Because they didn't know what really had happened to him. They didn't know exactly all the information of if he was telling the truth, why he disappeared, all of this. They actually suspected his friends of murder for a while there. And so it's an interesting story, but Travis himself is such a humble man that you look at this man, and there are times where I say, if the story is incredible, or lacking in what you might consider to be plausible credibility, sometimes you have to look to the person and see if the person is a credible person. And I find Travis himself to be a very credible man because there's a humility about him. There is all sorts of details about the man that make him seem very genuine. It was not something he originally set out to make money on, and there was almost 20 years of a story he kept quiet and didn't say much about, and he started slowly coming out with that. So it's a very interesting man, and I'm going to find out more about him tonight. I know him personally, but I don't know him well, like a buddy.
Yeah.
A pal.
Do you have podcasts or anything for people to listen back?
Do I have what? I'm sorry.
Like a podcast, a replay, so that
Oh yes, we do our show live at 9 p.m. here, which is 3 a.m. there.
Yeah.
Where you are, and but we do we run it in a broadcast on our 24/7 stream, which is always playing over at intrepidradio.com or our now parent IPBN-FM.com. And so you can hear it there. And there are podcasts that we put up. We're in the process of building a much more user-friendly archive, and that's coming in the next couple of months as we're going. Our partner in all of this, Rocky Stucci, has purchased an FM radio station, a terrestrial radio station here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and so he's working heavily on that, and some of this will be porting over to the FM, but it's going to have a whole different program over there. But it's going to set up a very unique situation for us to get archives out there. You can hear us on our YouTube channels. You can find us, and it's all linked up to Intrepid Radio. Or you can just go into Intrepid Radio, and you're probably going to hear it for the next week in continual, along with some of our other shows on the network, a continual revolving replay. And I'll also be posting links for the podcasts.
Okay. We've been asked to say hi to you from Beth Arzi. She's in the chat room. I assume.
Oh, hello, Beth.
Okay. One last question from David. It's said in the Bible that people live till they're hundreds of years. How come we don't now? Do you think it's down to cancer and stuff like that?
We never did.
Or do you think we never did?
They either never did, and it was exaggerated. Oh, my grandfather lived to be 960 years old. We don't know how exaggerated that is. Or there are some theories, again, that have no basis in being able to prove them scientifically. But there was a theory that – here's the theory as we were taught in seminary, was that when the flood took place, the great flood of Noah, and of course there's a lot of evidence that a great universal flood took place of some kind.
Yeah.
Whether it was universal to the known world or universal worldwide, we aren't sure. There seems to be a lot of geologic evidence that talks about the earth was once covered in water at one point. We don't know if that's to a great flood, and many people tend to discount that. But one of the theories was that it says in the Bible that when the flood came that it didn't just rain for 40 days and 40 nights. It said the fountains of the deep were opened and and the sky was broken. There's something about the sky being broken open, that the earth was covered with a vapor canopy. And it was that canopy that collapsed during the flood. And in essence, there was no UV rays from the sun that could get through. And the earth was pretty tropical. And this is why they're finding, even in the Arctic and the Antarctic, they find remnants and fossils of tropical trees and plants and things like that. So this was the theory that was built out of that. I don't know how solid that theory is, but this was one of the explanations that was given to us to understand what happened. And when that vapor canopy, which protected really all the earth from these UV rays from the sun, when that was broken, then we have the blue skies and the sun's rays and the UV radiation that greatly diminished the age of man. Now, that's an explanation we were told. I don't know how ridiculous that is or how seriously scientific that is. I don't know. Would UV rays, if we could prevent UV rays, would we not age as fast? I don't know. I don't know for sure. All we know is that we are told that they lived for those extremely long periods of time. And you get this with other cultures as well. With the Anunnaki, you get some of that. And so on. So did it really happen? I know in the Nephilim passage in Genesis, right after it talks about the Nephilim being on the earth, it says, and man's days shall be numbered. They shall now be 120 years instead of what it was prior to that. And some think that has to do with the flood. Now, again, whether that's just part of the mythology or part of something that's really happened, we don't know for sure. We don't know if people lived to be 600 years old, several thousand, tens of thousands of years ago. We have no idea. We think they probably didn't. We tend to think they lived a lot less. Like by the time they hit the age I am now, they'd be, they'd be worshipped for being a god, for being alive this long. So who knows? Okay.
Is this just out of curiosity before we finish off? Your book writing, your Egypt stuff with John.
Exodus Reality.
Yeah. Is this your full-time job, or do you actually do a different job?
Well, I do all kinds of things. I would say that that's my full-time job, and I sometimes have to support paying the electric bill by doing graphics and design and artwork and stuff like that. I do a lot of book cover design for people. I've been, as I said, I've been in advertising for, really since the mid-1980s. And started out as an artist, went to an art director, been a creative director of a couple of different ad agencies, worked with agencies that we worked with clients like Disney and National Car Rental and Kraft Foods and Pepperidge Farm and Coca-Cola and things like that. So those were the things that pulled me through really the 90s and the early 2000s. And after 9/11, our agency shut down. All advertising across the United States seemed to just shut down over the next month. Nobody was doing anything. And our agency shut down. And I just started freelancing after that. So I've been a freelance designer, a freelance writer, freelance illustrator. I illustrate books and all that kind of stuff. So
okay. So where can people find you if they want to find out more about you, Scotty?
Probably the best place to find me in one encapsulated place is my personal website. It's just myname.com. It's ScottAlanRoberts.com. And Alan, because there's 20,000 different ways to spell Alan, it seems, is ALAN. So ScottAlanRoberts.com.
Okay. Well, Scotty, thank you very much for joining us tonight on the KTPF Community Talk Show and keeping the paranormal friendly. And we hope to speak to you again soon. Give our regards to John.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And whenever I see him again, I'll let him know.
Okay, then. Well, thanks very much indeed. It's been great. It's been really brilliant having you on. And don't be a stranger.
I won't. Thank you, guys.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Scotty.
All right. Bye-bye.
Scotty, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the KTPF Community Talk Show. So until next time, it's good night from me.
And it's good night from her.
And it's good night from them.
So until next time.
The spooky laugh is back.
You want to laugh, do you?
Ready?
There you go. Until next time, all that's left to say is
keep the paranormal friendly.
Good night,
night guys.
Night, guys.
This is where it's at.
You're listening to Parasearch UK Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio.